In the previous episode, our team of so-called experts somehow managed to fit this 670cc V-twin Predator in the back of this 1969 Renault 10, and we also got the engine running for the first time. Today our goal is to get the car moving under its own power for the first time in 27 years. Now we have a lot to do in the next 15 or so minutes, and of course that's YouTube time. In reality, it took us a week or so to get where we're at right now. I reckon the first thing we need to do is connect the Renault throttle cable to the Predator engine. This should be fun. So here's the throttle cable that Renault installed at the factory 54 years ago. It's a good starting point, and I reckon we'll need to somehow connect this cable to the throttle on the Predator engine without modifying or damaging this cable. Because, well, parts for this car are hard to find, and let's not screw anything up if we don't have to. So the solution to our dilemma is obviously to custom build some sort of interface that the old throttle cable can attach to and link the accelerator pedal to the throttle linkage on the 670cc engine. Well, off camera we spent some time at the lathe machining up a few parts that would make all this happen. Now this bell crank was sourced from the Jungle site for less than $20 and it's the key to our throttle interface. And of course we need a throttle return spring and a bunch of hardware. Now, through the magic of video editing, we'll take all these random parts and build exactly what we need. So there it is. This stuff allows us to retain the original Renault throttle cable, and we can bridge the old with the new with a few more parts. Let's see how it works so far. Not too shabby. I reckon this is about as good as it's going to get. Now all we need to do is install a second cable from the bell crank to the throttle on the Predator engine, and for this we'll use a bicycle brake cable. So today we're connecting the Renault accelerator to the governor side of the Predator engine throttle. Now I realize this is not ideal because the governor tends to slow down the throttle response, but we do have a plan. For today we'll just run the engine on the governor. Now don't get mad at me, like I said we do have a plan and the system will evolve once we get everything sorted out. Now let's see how it works. Not too bad. This will definitely poke the bear when we stab the accelerator down, and that's good enough for me. The next thing we'll need to focus on is the choke. Now, the original idea was to activate the choke with this electric solenoid. This is sort of how they do it on older outboard boat motors. While the concept is good, unfortunately this solenoid doesn't have enough throw in it when it's activated, and it won't completely close the choke plate. And yeah, I could probably build a new linkage to make it work, but we decided to go old school and use a choke cable. Now, a choke cable ain't as easy as it sounds, and that's because the choke knob has to be within reach of the driver, and on a rear-engined car, that makes for a pretty long cable. So in order to keep the length of the cable reasonable, we 3D printed a bracket that would allow us to mount the choke under the driver's seat. It's weird, but after all, this is a Renault with a 2-cylinder lawnmower engine, and weird is the new normal. Let's fast forward a few hours and see how the choke works. So as you can see, we have the choke mounted under the driver's seat, and it's easy to get to when sitting in the driver's seat, so that's a bonus. The 3D printed bracket's made out of ASA filament, which can tolerate the heat of the interior no problem. I reckon if the ASA plastic fails, the car would more or less have to be on fire, so no worries about the bracket. Anyway, let's see how it works. And once again, that's more than good enough, which is about the standard Renault builds to. So next up is to connect the fuel supply to this engine. Now the original fuel tank for this car previously occupied this space back here, and well, the original fuel tank is FUBAR, or as the French say, NFG. And that's a problem, because well, it's a problem, trust me. The good news is we picked up a massive 2.5-gallon fuel tank at the Jungle site for about $65. Now, some of you may be thinking, that's kind of small, Jimbo. And well, you might be right. However, in the past, we've used significantly smaller fuel tanks on our project cars without an issue. So let's just see if this one will be big enough or not. And yeah, well, it's made out of aluminum. Not bad for $65. Oh yeah, it even has a sending unit to measure the fuel level. I wonder if we're going to need that. Anyway, here's the fuel cap. It's kind of on the big side, but it'll certainly work. Now on the inside of this tank, it's actually filled with foam, and as I understand, the foam can be removed. For now, we're going to keep the foam, and if it causes any problems, we'll of course remove it. Now this tank has 10 AN bungs welded to it, and they're kind of big, so we ended up getting 10 AN to 3 AN reducers, and then we got a set of 3 AN to barbed hose fittings so we could use regular fuel line. It's quite the puzzle, but somehow we managed. So for the bungs we won't be using, we purchased caps, and that should allow us to keep most of the fuel in the tank. On the top of the tank, we more or less did the same thing and put barb fittings for the tank vent and plugged the other hole. So the best location that we could determine for this fuel tank is right about here. Not exactly great, but it will work for now. So in order to mount the tank here, we needed to construct a very robust mounting bracket, and off camera that's just what we did. So this fully welded bracket allows us to mount the fuel tank in the corner of the engine bay without drilling any unnecessary holes. These two holes line up with the rear bumper bracket, and this hole here lines up with a hole in the rear valance panel. Let's take a look at it when it's installed in the car. So far, so good. Let's fast forward a bit and see how it all fits with everything attached. Not too bad. At least for now we have our fuel situation solved. So far we managed to connect the throttle, the choke, and the fuel tank. I reckon the next thing we need to do is connect the electrical stuff to this engine before we can fire it up. And for that, we built a standalone electrical panel that'll allow the engine to start and run, and with this gizmo we don't have to alter the electrical system in the Renault. Now you know we're serious, because this is a genuine race car part that you find in, well, race cars, and a few Honda Civics that pretend to be race cars. Anyway, this thing is, the new ignition key, I guess, and of course that's to engage the starter, if all goes well. Now this switch here is the engine kill switch. You see, on a Predator engine it has magneto ignition, and in order to shut off the engine you have to short the magnetos to ground. So this switch was actually installed backwards in the panel, and on is off and off is on. That's the way magnetos work. Now this switch and this switch are for future upgrades, although currently we plan on using this switch to control the fuel shutoff solenoid on the carburetor. We will eventually disable the shutoff solenoid on the carburetor, but for now we plan on keeping it in place. Now over on the side of the box, we 3D printed some clamps so we can mount this thing to the big chrome stick that's poking out of the floor of the Renault. It sure is nice of Renault to put that stick there, and I'm sure it might have other purposes that only the French people understand, but for us it makes a great mounting point for our ignition box. Now, whenever possible, we avoid making permanent modifications to this car because this is actually a pretty cool all-original vintage Renault. Now, we have no plans on restoring this car, and when we're finished having our fun with it, we'll pass the car along to someone else who can restore it or use it for parts. But that ain't gonna be for a while. Anyway, for now, we plan on reanimating this Renault carcass with an unsuitable engine to see how fast we can get this car to go. If this is your first time watching one of our videos, well, this is the sort of thing we do. You see, lawnmower-powered cars is what we do best. Now, if you're not already subscribed, please consider it, because this is the only channel on YouTube where you can find this type of content. Let's fast forward a bit and see how this project's coming along. Well, it looks like the race car switch panel's all wired in and firmly mounted to the big chrome stick poking out of the floor. Over on the back side of the car, you can see the harness connects directly to the engine, and I reckon it's time to see if the switches work. Yes! Okay, things are about to get serious. It's time to put some gasoline in the mini fuel tank and fire this engine up. After spending the last few months fooling around with the diesel Saturn, it's refreshing to smell the aroma of unleaded gasoline again. That should do it. This French license plate ain't gonna cut it as far as making this car road legal. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this car's been off the road for 27 years. And here in Kansas, in order to get tags for this car, well, we have to have the car inspected to verify the title matches the vehicle ID number, which ain't a problem. Unfortunately, this car has to be running and driving before they'll do the paperwork inspection. And to make matters worse, I'm only a few hundred feet from the police station, so today I have to be a good citizen and not drive this car on public roads. So the good news is I do have a 2-acre lot we can drive the car in and verify that everything works. Alright, let's do this. Well, that was easy. Keep in mind we plan on making a lot of changes, but for now the engine's running and it's time to see if the car will drive. So it turns out I don't know anything about French cars, and that includes the shift pattern for the gearbox. So I joined a French car forum in all places Australia. Anyway, according to the very helpful folks in Oz, reverse should be somewhere around here. Now, don't panic because I'm not using the clutch. You see, if you watched the previous video, you would know we fitted this car with a torque converter type clutch, so no clutch required. Anyway, it seems reverse is a bit dodgy. Oh, that's first gear, I think. Nope, that's first gear. Well, according to the forum, it's possible the rubber bushings in the linkage have perished, and I might be SOL as far as finding reverse. Anyway, after a while, we did get the car to go backwards, but it's not what you think. Yeah, a little exercise is what I needed anyway, and at the same time I was able to get the car where I wanted it to be. Win-win, I guess. Okay, for the first time in 37 years, this car is about to move under its own power. Something seems to be rattling and I'll have to check that out. More than likely the gearbox mounts need to be replaced. Evidently they're still available for a reasonable price. I reckon I need to cut the lawn. You know, the French are notorious for building ultra comfortable cars, and this one's no exception. The car pretty much floats over this uneven terrain. The go-kart torque converter type clutch allows the car to take off in pretty much any gear, and it looks like we really don't need first gear at all. I reckon around town the gearbox could be left in third gear, and the car could be driven like it has an automatic transmission. So the brakes work, and that's good because we spent a month off camera rebuilding the entire brake system. Basically, every rubber part had to be replaced, including the bits inside the master cylinder. Now, interestingly enough, I was able to source all the parts here in the States, and to replace all the rubber cost less than $150. Well, we do have a few problems, and I'll have to take a look at that shift linkage and possibly replace the gearbox mounts. Meh, it could be worse. Of course, nothing really works as expected, and we'll see how it works when we actually take the car out for its first real road test, and hopefully that's soon. Anyway, in fourth gear with the engine spinning at around 4,150 RPM, the car can conceivably go 70 miles per hour. Of course, that's the simple math, and that doesn't account for the car being shaped like a brick.
2 bricks!
Okay, I see. How about 1.5 bricks?
Alright.
So being that the car is shaped like 1.5 bricks, well, the little 22 horsepower engine may in fact struggle to get the car up to 70 miles per hour. So we'll likely have to make some improvements to the engine in order to get the additional power needed. And that's where the fun begins. But before we do any modifications, we need to get benchmark data of the performance of a completely stock engine. Anyone care to guess how fast this thing will go as is? For the record, my best guess is it'll do 55 miles per hour. Well, I still have a lot of work to do to get this car back on the road, so I reckon it's time to end this episode. Until next time.